Hey guys, tonight we begin with Schnapps, fog, and 100,000 armed Austrians stumbling into one of the most baffling, self-inflicted disasters in military history, the Battle of Karansebes. You ever try to play Risk with 6 drunk uncles who all speak different languages and hold grudges dating back to your grandma's funeral? Now give them horses, bayonets, and 0 adult supervision. That's where we're going tonight. You're a soldier in the Habsburg monarchy's army, and honestly, you've got a 1 in 5 chance of even understanding the orders being screamed at you. Half your unit's from Hungary, your captain's from Tyrol, and your sergeant thinks Czech is the universal language. And the best part, you're not even fighting anyone yet, you're preparing to fight, which is great, because it gives you time to drink, which you do, generously. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and your local time in the comments, especially if you're listening in a tent during military maneuvers. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're somewhere near the town of Karansebes, a bit of soggy dirt in what's now Romania, but in 1788 was part of the Ottoman Habsburg slap fight known as the Austro-Turkish War. You've been marching for days, feet soaked, rifle slung over your shoulder, and you're absolutely convinced that the Ottomans are somewhere out there in the fog, or wolves, or ghosts, or most dangerously your own cavalry. But we're not there yet. First, you need to find something to drink. Scouts from your division, mostly German-speaking, go ahead to cross the river and look for any sign of Ottoman movement. They find nothing. No enemy camps, no sentries, no slashing scimitars. What they do find is a wagon loaded with barrels of schnapps. This, to you and your frost-bitten friends, is better than looting Istanbul itself. Franz, was ist das Schnaps, mein Freund, a gift from God? You drink, then you barter, then you argue with a group of Wallachian cavalrymen who show up and insist the schnapps was meant for them. They're already riding suspiciously close and not taking no for an answer. You, already half drunk and fully armed, decide to form a tight circle around the barrels. For security, you are now a small, spinning, schnapps-drunk planet with a gravitational field of bad decisions. One of the hussars makes a grab for a barrel. Someone shouts, someone else throws a punch. A musket fires probably by accident, but that doesn't matter, because it echoes across the valley like God sneezing into a tuba. Instantly, the rest of the nearby troops, already jittery, fog-drenched, and multilingual, assume the Ottomans have attacked. You hear at first a wild, thunderous crash of boots, hooves, and shouted gibberish. Tursai, Tursai, someone yells, which, if you spoke Romanian, you'd know means the Turks. But you don't. You hear Turk and assume it's true. Panic is now airborne. Let's pause here for a verified historical fact. The Austro-Turkish War, 1788-1791, was a very real thing. Austria, allied with Russia, was trying to push the Ottomans back out of Eastern Europe, and despite being one of the most powerful empires in Europe, Austria spent more time tripping over itself than actually fighting the Ottomans. Case in point tonight. Also, weird trivia for you. The Habsburg army at Karansebes reportedly included troops speaking at least 10 different native languages, which means when someone yells fire, someone else might think it means run, and a third guy thinks you just complimented his shoes. Now let's talk open-ended historical debate. Did the Schnapps fight really start the whole battle? Some historians think it's exaggerated, maybe a metaphor, maybe a fable, but Austrian military records do confirm a sudden retreat and loss of life with no enemy engagement. So, either Schnapps or the world's most aggressively haunted forest. Anyway, back to you. You grab your musket and start running. Where does it matter? Forward, backward just away from the sound of whatever might be Turk adjacent. You spot movement through the trees and immediately fire. It's a bush. The bush survives, but you trip and roll down a hill. Someone behind you screams, "They're flanking us." You don't know who they are. At this point, if a raccoon sneezed behind you, you'd lob a grenade. Except you don't have grenades. You have 18th century hand-forged incompetence and very sweaty boots. As more troops pour across the river to help, they bump into the original drunk scouts, who are now defensive and Schnapps depleted. Another shot rings out. Maybe it's your fault this time. Maybe it's theirs. Either way, it's enough for one Austrian column to scream ambush and begin firing wildly into the darkness. You duck behind a tree. Someone gallops past you on a horse, waving a saber and yelling in Hungarian. You scream back in German. He screams louder in Slovak. You both accidentally shoot at a tent, and that tent belongs to your commander. Night falls completely. There's no moon, only gunfire, shouts, horses breaking legs in ditches, and a very lonely Schnapps barrel sitting next to a mule that has clearly had a bad day. By now, multiple sections of the Austrian army are engaged in full-blown combat with each other. Word spreads that the Ottomans are disguising themselves in Austrian uniforms, which is wild, since the Ottomans haven't even arrived yet. They're still 2 days away, probably sipping tea and planning something sensible. You, meanwhile, are face down in mud, sobbing, praying, and accidentally reloading your musket with chewing tobacco. So ends the first chaotic act of Karansebes, a military disaster so legendary it didn't even require an enemy. You haven't seen a single Turk, but somehow you've fired your gun twice, broken your sword, and possibly stabbed your cousin. And the Schnapps long gone, probably the smartest casualty of the night. You wake up inside your own helmet. Not metaphorically, you've literally fallen asleep with your head stuffed inside the metal dome you were supposed to wear for protection. Everything smells like schnapps, sweat, and horse. Someone is groaning nearby. You roll over and see a man trying to punch a tree because he thinks it's Ottoman infantry. He's losing. The fog hasn't lifted. If anything, it's gotten thicker, like a warm cabbage stew someone poured over the battlefield just to mess with you. And the silence deafening. That is, until you hear the sound that sets your stomach tumbling into your boots, horses. Lots of them. You squint into the mist and see shapes, dozens of them, galloping toward your makeshift camp across the river. Your brain, soaked in residual schnapps and fear, leaps straight to the worst-case scenario. Ottoman cavalry, here to avenge your drunken assault on, well, yourself. You grab your rifle. You scream. They're coming in a language that may or may not be German around you. Sleepy Austrians leap to their feet, weapons drawn, half of them still wearing nightshirts or carrying cooking pots instead of muskets. But here's the punchline. Those Ottoman cavalrymen galloping out of the fog. They're your scouts, the same ones who tried to buy schnapps from the Wallachians the night before. They're just coming back, probably excited to tell everyone about the world's least successful liquor transaction. You don't know that, though, and you don't wait to ask. You raise your musket and fire. The shot misses, but that doesn't matter, because once again, the sound is what does the damage. Like setting off fireworks in a gas station. The entire camp jolts awake. Every single soldier convinced the Ottomans have launched a surprise attack. Someone yells, "Turks again! Always with the Turks!" And the Great Panic reboots. Now the scouts are confused. They see their own army screaming and opening fire. Stop, they shout. Say fazi, nebunule, which doesn't help, because no one in your unit speaks Romanian. Someone thinks they're casting spells. You reload and aim again. The scouts realize they've made a horrible mistake and try to retreat. But a few of them go down. One horse collapses into a supply wagon, which collapses into another wagon, which just happens to be carrying musket balls. The ammunition spills everywhere. Cue joke number 1. This is the first time in military history a logistics accident becomes a weapon. People are slipping on musket balls like they're banana peels. Meanwhile, the other regiments nearby hear the ruckus and assume it's the real thing, this time actual Ottoman cavalry, crossing the river and attacking. So they spring into action by charging blindly into the fog. You watch as one company of German infantry collides full speed with another regiment of Hungarian hussars. Neither side recognizes the other. Shouting erupts. Accusations fly. Someone accuses someone else of being a Turkish spy because they smell like lamb. A sword is drawn. By accident, someone gets slapped with a saddlebag full of onions. And then, inevitably, the shots begin again. Here's your historical fact. For this section, the Battle of Karansebes is the only known military engagement in modern European history, where one empire attacked itself for nearly 2 full days without ever encountering the enemy. No Ottomans, not even one, just friendly fire, bad lighting, and terminal-grade miscommunication. You duck behind a log, hyperventilating. The horses are screaming. The fog is thick. A lieutenant charges past you, shouting. Flank them, but no one knows who them is. Probably the angry tree from last night. Now let's drop a weird trivia nugget. At least 2 separate units in the Austrian army mistook each other for Ottoman cavalry purely because one group had feathers in their hats and the other had darker coats. That's right, feathers, not sabers, not battle cries, feathers. It was the ultimate fashion-driven civil war. You stand up to run and immediately collide with a drummer boy. He screams and hits you with his drum. It makes a sound like a wet cabbage slapping a door. Across the river, a group of Austrians sees more movement, possibly a panicked pig, and open fire. The return volley comes from their own side. Someone lights a torch, accidentally sets a tree on fire, and the flames finally give everyone some visibility. It does not help, because now you can see exactly who you're shooting at, and it's definitely another Austrian. You scream ceasefire, but your accent makes it sound like zisfire, and someone takes that as confirmation to launch a volley from a small portable cannon. The cannon is aimed the wrong way. Now comes our second joke. Someone actually gets shot with a warning flare. That's right, a signal flare, meant to go up in the air, fires directly into a man's chest. He's fine. It bounces off his cuirass. But the trauma sticks with him for life. Let's pause for a conspiracy. Some military historians speculate that the panic wasn't entirely an accident. There's a theory unproven that a few officers may have deliberately fired on returning scouts to create an excuse to retreat without ever engaging the Ottomans. Why politics, incompetence, or maybe they just really didn't want to be there? You fall to your knees behind an overturned wagon. Everything is spinning. You've fired 2 shots, dropped your powder horn into a soup kettle, and somehow ended up wearing someone else's boots. You check your pockets. You're missing 4 bullets and have acquired a carrot. A man gallops by on the mule yelling, "Abandon the Schnapps," and you briefly consider desertion. And yet, through the chaos, something stirs in you, a voice, the last coherent voice of reason from your soggy, schnapps-drowned brain. And it says, maybe don't shoot at horses unless they shoot first. You're not entirely sure when you stopped running and started bartering. One moment, you're sprinting through the fog with a powder horn full of soup and someone else's bayonet belt. The next, you're standing in a tense semicircle around a barrel of schnapps, haggling with Wallachian hussars like it's a farmer's market and the world isn't on fire. The hussars don't look pleased, you don't look sober, and the schnapps is sitting there like the last hot meal before a firing squad, beloved. doomed and guaranteed to start a fight. You, noble representative of the German-speaking scouts, try to play diplomat. Let's share the barrel. You say, the Wallachians cross their arms. One of them spits. Another rests his hand meaningfully on his curved saber. They murmur to each other in Romanian, which you interpret as, this guy's gonna steal our schnapps. You nod sagely, then respond by waving a sausage. Now, here's your first bizarre trivia drop of the evening. Habsburg scouts often carried sausages and bread in their knapsacks as portable rations, but many used them for bartering instead, especially with allied or local militias. So technically, this is a legal move. Stupid, but legal. Tensions rise. You put your hand on the barrel like it's your firstborn child. A Wallachian horse snorts and shifts nervously. Someone burps threateningly. The fog thickens. A coin is flipped, caught, and no one agrees on what it means. Then a voice, probably yours, slurring slightly, says, all right, let's arm wrestle for it. Which would have been the perfect solution if not for the musket that gets knocked over in the shuffle. It goes off. Because of course it does. You're in the 18th century. The trigger's basically a suggestion, and the powder is ready to explode if someone sneezes near it. The crack echoes like God slapping a frying pan. Every soldier within 300 meters panics. Somewhere behind you, a sergeant shouts ambush in Hungarian. Someone else yells retreat in Italian. You hear Terzi again, shouted in panic by a hussar who is now galloping straight toward you, saber drawn. Let's lock in this historical fact. The Habsburg military at Karansebes was comprised of multinational troops speaking more than 10 different languages and dialects, with no common code for urgent commands. So stop could sound like charge, and don't fire might be interpreted as fire twice. And yes, it gets worse. Within minutes, the Schnapps barrel is kicked over. Someone screams traitors, and another scout tackles a mule. You scramble for cover behind a stack of crates, only to discover they contain nothing but candles and onions. Great, you're defending your life with ambiance and salad ingredients. Your second joke of the night, the Wallachians never even get to drink the schnapps. The barrel is shot, tipped, and most of it pours into the grass, possibly hydrating a very confused squirrel. One of your fellow scouts drops to his knees and tries to lap the schnapps off the ground. He gets stepped on by a horse. The horse apologizes. You hallucinate that part, probably. And now we come to a critical turning point. The argument over schnapps becomes the mythic origin of an entire army fighting itself. Was it really about schnapps? Some historians say yes. Others claim it was a cover story for bad reconnaissance and worse leadership. One theory suggests the Ottomans may have sent spies to trigger confusion. Another says the Austrians didn't need help. They were just that bad at being an army. Honestly, feels like the last one checks out. You stagger back into the underbrush, trying to explain the situation to a nearby captain. There's no Turks, you wheeze. Only schnapps. He blinks at you, horrified. They've poisoned the schnapps. No, wait. Too late. He's sprinting toward a line of infantry, shouting something about chemical warfare, which doesn't even exist yet. Gunfire erupts in the trees. You drop flat on your stomach and low crawl toward what you hope is your camp, but turns out to be the latrine. An explosion rocks the ground behind you. A wagon is tipped. A fire breaks out. A mule bolts directly into a drummer, who responds by smashing his own drum in rage. And right there, in the chaos, comes your third joke. An Austrian officer later claimed he could identify at least 6 separate internal battles happening at once. Not fronts, not skirmishes. Full-blown Austrian-on-Austrian combat zones. Each one equally confused, equally loud, and equally drunk. You find a log to sit on. Breathe. Try to center yourself. You look at your uniform, now covered in schnapps, mud, and what may be decorative cheese. A hussar runs by screaming in Serbian. You respond with a polite, confused danka. At this point, you consider defecting to the Ottoman Empire. They probably have bread. Then, from the woods, comes a new sound: brass horns, drums, marching boots. Oh no! Reinforcements! And they don't know anything yet. They see the burning wagons, the scattered bodies, the still smoldering latrine, and you wild-eyed, pants torn, holding a candle in one hand and a musket in the other. The captain of the new regiment raises his spyglass. Looks like the Turks ambushed them. You open your mouth to explain, but all that comes out is, "It was Schnapps." He lowers the glass. "Must be code," he whispers. And that, dear listener, is how you accidentally cause the second wave of self-inflicted violence. All because diplomacy via liquor failed harder than a butter knife in a bear fight. You're not sure what's louder, the screaming, the gunfire, or the mule orchestra currently conducting a full-blown stampede through the underbrush. Either way, you've lost control of your limbs, sense of direction, and possibly your nationality. You sprint between trees, branches slapping your face like the universe trying to reset your brain manually. Around you, the Austrian army, the whole army is tripping, falling, loading weapons backward, and occasionally firing at absolutely nothing. Nothing, in this case, includes rocks, trees, shadows, and at least one unfortunate accordion player who popped out from behind a bush looking for the latrines. Let's get something straight here. Nobody is attacking you. There are no Ottomans, zero sabers, no war cries in Turkish, just fog, booze, and the ever-present fear of being slightly to the left of someone's imagination. And yet, every sound sets off a new wave of panic. Bang! Someone hears a branch snap and drops his musket. It fires as it hits the ground. That shot scares the horses. The horses bolt. Their riders shout. Other soldiers hear those shouts and assume, with military confidence, yes, that is exactly how Ottoman raids begin. And thus the cycle begins again. You crouch behind a bush, eyes wide, mouth dry. You are not blinking. You are not breathing. You are now a part of the shrubbery. A nearby sergeant barks orders in a dialect that sounds like someone gargling gravel while being slapped. You nod and pretend you understand. He points into the mist and says, "Flank right." You go left. Always go left, that way. You have at least a 50% chance of running into fewer bullets. Let's go ahead and drop a historical fact here. Before your next blunder, there were an estimated 80,000, 100,000 troops in the Austrian camp at Karansebes, spread across multiple nationalities and military branches. This included infantry, cavalry, artillery, and support units, none of whom had practiced large-scale coordination together, ever. This is important, because what happens next requires the full commitment of an army that does not speak the same language, does not trust each other, and does not believe in the phrase "stand down." Somewhere near the central camp, a young officer sees shadows moving toward him and orders his men to fire. The line obeys. Shots are fired into the fog. A shout goes up in Polish hold fire, friendlies, but it's misheard as open fire. Enemies. Boom! New panic unlocked. A second unit hears the volley and assumes the front line's being overrun. They charge forward in an attempt to rescue their comrades, bayonets gleaming in the moonlight. Their comrades, seeing dozens of men sprinting toward them with stabby enthusiasm, freak out and fire again. Meanwhile, you're trying to reload your musket behind a wagon that has bizarrely become a kind of temporary shrine. Someone has painted a saint's face on the side with mustard. Two men are praying, one is just eating a boot. Let's roll in our weird trivia nugget. At least one mule carrying fireworks meant for signaling was accidentally set ablaze and galloped through the battlefield like a flaming harbinger of divine wrath. No one ever figured out who lit it. The mule was last seen heading for the river, trailing sparks and glory. You, naturally, mistake the burning mule for an Ottoman fire demon. You run fast. This is when you hit the tree. Hard. You bounce off, muttering apologies, and keep running until you hit another tree. This time you drop your musket. It discharges. You hit the ground and seconds later feel another body crash beside you. It's a drummer. He's crying. He offers you a slice of bread. You accept it solemnly. The fog makes everything feel sacred. A third man appears, says nothing, and immediately throws up into his own hat. Here's your open-ended historical debate. How many soldiers actually died at Karansebes reports vary wildly. Some say only a couple hundred. Others suggest up to 200. But given that most of the death was friendly fire, trampling, drowning, or being mistaken for livestock, it's hard to get a reliable body count, especially since the next morning, many soldiers were found alive, drunk, and covered in onion peel. Back on your feet, you stagger toward what you think is the command post. You shout your name, rank, and a desperate plea for peace. A voice answers, "Hold your fire," which is immediately followed by musket shots. You drop again. A bullet zips overhead and hits a kettle. A kettle explodes. That's not a joke. It actually explodes. Steam whistles out like a banshee. One soldier screams. They've got boiling oil and throws himself into the nearest bush. Cue joke the 3. One of the few official field reports from the battle mentions equipment loss due to boiling pressure, which likely refers to a cooking pot, but makes it sound like an 18th century pressure cooker just assassinated a squad. You're officially out of ammunition. You're holding your musket like a walking stick, using it to gently tap bodies and confirm they're still breathing. One groans, another curses you in Croatian. A third wakes up, panics, and punches himself unconscious again. You sit beside him. Dawn is creeping in. The gunfire is finally slowing down, not because peace has returned, but because everyone's either out of ammo, out of courage, or out cold. Smoke lingers like a bad joke. Horses whimper in the distance. Somewhere, someone is still screaming in a language you swear you just made up. You hold your head in your hands and whisper, "There were no Ottomans." A nearby private sighs, long and slow. "No, just idiots." You do not remember running toward the bridge. You just suddenly find yourself on it, muddy boots slipping on the wet planks, fog curling around your ankles like suspicious ghosts, and 30 other equally confused Austrians yelling conflicting commands in at least 6 languages. Someone screams, "Vorwärts!" Someone else yells, "Zurück!" A third guy just shouts potatoes and leaps into the river. You choose survival. You run backwards. Welcome to the Bridge of Nope, the world's least strategic and most overused wooden structure. Since that time, someone tried to cross a moat with IKEA instructions. You, dear listener, are now sprinting across it with an entire Austrian battalion chasing itself. Let's break this mess down. The bridge spans a shallow, sluggish river that isn't particularly dangerous unless you're trying to cross it while being pursued by your own cavalry, who were startled by your own infantry, who mistook your returning scouts for Turkish assassins. You know, classic military coordination. Behind you, someone shouts, "Fire!" and everyone obeys because nobody knows which direction it was meant for. Muskets go off. Cannon fire roars not aimed, just sort of sent in the general direction of the screaming. One artillery unit, reportedly asleep until 5 minutes ago, decides to liven up the mood by launching a full volley into the darkness. You duck just in time to avoid being decapitated by a cannonball that sails clean over your head and knocks the hat off the man behind you. He doesn't stop running. He just shouts "Donka" like the universe gave him a haircut. Here's a historical fact you can cling to while stampeding across the planks. Karansebes marked one of the only instances in recorded military history where an army built a bridge to advance toward the enemy, and then used it within hours to flee from itself. You trip over a plank and nearly tumble into the river. Someone grabs your coat. You don't say thank you because you're not even sure if they're friend or foe anymore. Your concept of sides has eroded like the banks of this dumb, muddy river. Then, disaster! The artillery, those brave, sleepy lads who just woke up, fire again! One of the cannonballs slams into the far side of the bridge. The structure shudders. Wood splinters. Screams echo across the fog like someone punched a haunted pipe organ. And now we get to joke number 1. The only part of the bridge still standing is the bit held together by wine barrels. Someone used them as makeshift supports during construction. They worked until now. You feel the deck sag beneath you. Someone falls in. You glance over the edge just in time to see a cavalryman paddling frantically, still on his horse. Neither of them can swim. You leap the final few feet to solid ground and collapse, gasping. Others pour across behind you. One throws up, another throws down his weapon and starts praying to 3 different saints, just in case. And then come the mules. Oh yes! Someone forgot to unhitch the supply mules. They come galloping across the bridge at full panic speed, dragging carts full of medical supplies, crates of salted pork, and somehow a half-assembled piano. The bridge doesn't stand a chance. It collapses. And here comes weird trivia of the section. One of the supply carts that plunged into the river reportedly contained an entire crate of novelty helmets designed for the emperor's parade troops. They were never recovered. Somewhere in Romania, a fish is wearing a gold-plated pickelhaube. Now the troops on your side of the river watch in horror as the other half of their army is cut off, trapped on the opposite bank, still screaming, still confused, still occasionally shooting each other. You want to help, really, you do. But your gun is bent, your trousers are torn, and your spirit is leaking out through your boots. And here's your conspiracy debate of the day. Did someone sabotage the bridge? Some Austrian officers later blamed engineers for poor construction. Others whispered that rival regiments may have deliberately weakened the planks to slow down the cavalry. Still others insisted that divine punishment was at play, which feels like the most plausible explanation at this point. Back across the river, chaos reigns. A cavalry officer tries to rally his men with a stirring speech and is promptly trampled by a fleeing cart. An infantryman climbs a tree to get a better view, fires his musket at a shadow, and falls out of the tree. Someone starts singing the Habsburg anthem and is immediately pelted with biscuits. And you, slumped against a wagon wheel, decide that war is definitely a lifestyle choice and you'd rather go into pottery or cheese making, something with fewer explosions and less chance of bayoneting your own tent. Then a new voice rises over the madness. "Hold the line," it cries. "Hold the line. Damn you all." It's a general, you think, hard to tell under the mud and candle soot, but he's waving a sword and looking serious. Several men around you try to stand, square their shoulders, and reload. Then someone asks, "Which line?" And someone else says, "Whose side is he on?" The general pauses and runs, "Cue joke." But two different regiments arrested the same officer that night, thinking he was an Ottoman spy, despite the fact he was wearing Habsburg medals the size of dinner plates. The sun is trying to rise. It's given up halfway. Smoke curls over the ruined bridge. Distant shouting fades into exhausted groans. Someone is trying to light a fire with wet socks. Another soldier has turned his bayonet into a fishing spear. You look at the wreckage and whisper the dumbest sentence you've ever said. At least the Ottomans haven't shown up. You know what makes a crisis worse? A password. A simple, military-issued, army-wide, theoretically useful nighttime password that literally no one can remember, pronounce, or agree on, especially not in a coalition army drunk on schnapps. Shame and unfiltered paranoia. It's now past midnight. You're crouched in a drainage ditch, cradling a soggy biscuit and watching two Austrian pickets wave muskets at each other while arguing whether the code word is Ferdinand, Freundschaft, or Franz Josef mit Kasse. Spoiler, it's none of those. According to the official army orders, you definitely did not read. The real password for the night is Kriegsmarsch, which is beautiful in theory, but in practice sounds like someone sneezing through a trumpet. And when shouted through the fog by a man with a Slovak accent, it becomes indistinguishable from the word for horse poop. Naturally, everyone starts shooting each other again. Let's go ahead and drop a verified historical fact. Nighttime password systems were commonly used by 18th century armies to identify friend from foe during chaotic operations. The Austrian army at Karansebes issued a nightly code, but due to linguistic diversity and the sheer volume of panicked shouting, it failed instantly. You're watching two men argue about it right now. One says Kriegsmarsch, the other yells, "You're not the boss of me," and the third simply opens fire out of social anxiety. That third one is wearing your regiment's colors. You duck, trip, and land in someone's discarded soup. Gunshots erupt across the field again, not even aimed this time. Just powder, panic, and pride. Muskets fire into tents. Bayonets flash in the moonlight. A horse screams. Somewhere, a cannon goes off. No one knows why, but it feels appropriate. Cue joke number 1. A junior lieutenant later wrote in his diary, "I believe we achieved tactical success against the password itself." You feel this in your bones. You crawl out of the ditch just in time to see a quartermaster holding up a soggy note and yelling. The word is Kriegsmarsch, only to get hit in the face with a frying pan thrown by a confused cook. Yes, the cooks are involved now. Let's roll into your weird trivia nugget of the night. One of the regiments had French-speaking officers, and their password pronunciation included a soft ch sound, which several Germanic units mistook for a Turkish accent. That's right, they mistook their own officers for enemies because of how fancy they sounded. And that's how you find yourself holding a pistol to the head of a major you've never seen before, who's pleading with you in perfectly fluent French, while your brain plays a game of "Was he always in this war?" followed by "Should I fire?" followed by "Wait, how did I get 2 pistols?" You lower your guns, or you try to. One gets stuck in your belt, the other slips and discharges into your boot. Luckily, it was unloaded. Unluckily, it was full of candle wax for some reason. Now your leg smells like remorse and vanilla. Now comes our open-ended historical debate. Some historians believe the password confusion was the true catalyst for the collapse of discipline at Karansebes. Others argue it was just one of many interlocking dumb dominoes. A few even suggest there was no official password, and the whole thing was retroactively invented by embarrassed generals. Personally, it sounds exactly like the kind of mess that would begin with, "What's the code again?" and end with, "That guy looks Turkish. Stab him." Back to you. You're moving through the dark like a sleep-deprived squirrel, trying to find anyone who still recognizes your face. You find 3 soldiers asleep under a cannon, and a 4th hiding in a barrel. He screams when you look in, then offers you a biscuit. You hear voices up ahead. 2 men approach from the fog. One shouts, "Who goes there?" in a sharp, commanding tone. You freeze. You remember the password. You do. You're almost sure it's Krieg. March, March, Krieg, cringe, mosh. You blurt out Käsebrot. Wrong! One soldier fires, misses, hits a nearby tree. The tree, already riddled with bullets, topples over and crushes an abandoned field kitchen. A barrel of flour explodes, creating a white cloud of mystery and carbs. From within the flour cloud, someone shouts, they've blinded us with powder. More firing! Cue joke number 2. There were more powder-based hallucinations that night than in the average rock concert. One private claimed he saw the ghost of Charlemagne riding a lobster. This was never confirmed. You finally collapse behind a log. You're out of ammo, out of friends, and out of patience. A man runs past you in tears, clutching a severed boot. Another sits cross-legged, explaining to a pigeon why the empire's doomed. And then, oh no, you forget the password. For real this time, someone approaches. You recognize the uniform, but he's shouting at you, demanding the code. You panic. You yell Vienna. He scowls. Wrong. You try again, mustache. He raises his bayonet. You scream, sorry, I'm drunk. And somehow that works. He lowers the weapon, nods, and walks away muttering. That checks out. You lie there, blinking at the stars. The gunfire is dying down again, somewhere. A group of terrified Austrians has decided the only safe thing to do is dig a hole and hide in it until sunrise. You consider joining them. But before you can, a fresh shout echoes across the field. Someone's yelling about the Ottomans again. It's almost dawn now, and for a brief, insane moment, the battlefield goes still. Not calm, just still. Like a bear that's full but still hates you. You're slumped against a tree, arms trembling, face streaked with mud, Schnapps. And what you hope is gravy, your musket lies somewhere in the last trench you fell into, and your powder pouch now holds a dead frog. You blink up at the pale sky and wonder, not for the first time, am I the problem? But somewhere, not far from here, there's a man who's sleeping peacefully through all of this. Meet General Colloredo. He's your superior officer, your battlefield commander, and, as of this very moment, completely unaware that his entire army is eating itself like a drunken Ouroboros made of mustaches and nationalism. The man is asleep, not passed out, not concussed, just napping in his tent like it's a Sunday picnic in Vienna. And here's your historical fact. Field Marshal Colloredo was in command of the Austrian forces during this campaign, but there's no record of him issuing any orders during the incident at Karansebes. His silence and absence are legendary. His legacy, less so. Back to you. You stagger through the mist and stumble upon what might generously be called headquarters, a collection of half-collapsed tents, a shattered wagon, and two very lost-looking aides-de-camp trying to boil water in a helmet. You whisper, "Where's Colloredo?" One aide looks up, eyes wide, and replies, meditating, which is 18th century officer code for we can't wake him without getting slapped. You enter the main tent anyway. There he is, General Colloredo, hair perfect, boots polished, snoring softly under a velvet blanket while the army outside tears itself apart like a bear pit full of linguists. You gently prod him with a ladle. "Sir!" No response. "Sir, the men are firing on themselves." Still nothing. "Sir, a mule is on fire." He shifts slightly and murmurs something that sounds like sauerkraut. Let's throw in your weird trivia nugget. Colloredo reportedly brought a personal chef, wine steward, and astrologer to the field with him. Because what's a self-inflicted military disaster without horoscopes and appetizers? Outside, someone accidentally sets off a signal flare. It bursts above camp like a firework, and 3 platoons open fire at it. A cannon returns fire. The cannonball sails over your tent and lands in a laundry pile. Colorado doesn't even twitch. Cue joke. Number 1. Historians believe he may have slept through both nights of the battle. That's right, he missed 100,000 men screaming in 3.5 languages while cannons blasted air at each other and horses drowned in schnapps. You decide to take matters into your own hands. You grab a spyglass, climb a barrel, and attempt to signal anyone not currently sobbing. You spot movement in the distance. Is it cavalry? Is it finally the Ottomans? No, it's a single cart, being pulled by one man, wearing half a uniform. You wave, he flips you off. This is fine. Now, here's your open-ended historical debate. Was Colorado truly asleep? Or was he deliberately absent to avoid accountability? Some argue he feigned ignorance to escape blame. Others think he was simply overwhelmed. And still others believe he was having a genuinely fantastic dream and didn't want to ruin it. Historians remain baffled and slightly impressed. You re-enter the tent. Colorado rolls over and mutters, "Tell the emperor it's all under control." You stare at him. You glance outside, where 3 regiments are currently engaged in a fencing match over a sausage. 2 cannons have locked wheels, and a horse is screaming into a tuba. You sigh, and you lie down next to him, just for 5 minutes, just until the cannon fire stops. Cue joke number 2. The only official order found in Colorado's handwriting from that night read, "No onions in the broth." Military historians have framed it. It's in a museum. You can go see it. Suddenly, gunfire again, a volley so close your tent shakes. You jolt upright and dash outside, only to discover a group of Austrian officers firing into the air in what appears to be a ritual to scare off invisible Turks. You shout, "Stand down!" Someone yells, "Who said that?" Another officer shouts, "It's the Ottomans! They're mocking us in our own tongue!" You are now being hunted again. You sprint through the camp, trying to find anyone not actively hallucinating. You pass a chaplain attempting to baptize a cannon, a corporal hiding under a chicken coop, a mule trying to climb a ladder. You do not stop. You do not question. You run until you reach a supply tent, duck inside, and find it filled with flour. You exhale, finally, some peace, some silence. And then a soldier kicks in the flap and throws in a torch. You both scream, you both exit the tent him on fire. You covered in a cloud of powder. You roll in the mud. He rolls into a barrel. The tent collapses. Cue joke number 3. The Austrian army burned through more flour that night than bullets. Most of it didn't even feed anyone. It just created fog, inside fog. You limp back to HQ, powder white and steaming. Colorado is still asleep. You salute him, because at this point, honestly, he's your hero. You sit beside him and whisper, "Sir, we're winning." He smiles faintly. "Good," he murmurs, and begins to snore again. Boom! The sound hits you first deep, rattling, and slightly musical, like a cannon being fired through a church organ. Then comes the smell, gunpowder, roasted oats, and mule. You stagger out of the collapsed supply tent and immediately trip over a crate labeled "Do Not Ignite." That's unsettling because it's already on fire. You get up, look around, and discover that a mule train has exploded. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. You are now ankle deep in charred sausage, shattered barrels, and the kind of smell that suggests someone tried to use fireworks as a marinade. Let's go ahead and lock in this historical fact before we go any further. A supply wagon in the Austrian rear lines, reportedly loaded with black powder and rum, detonated in the early hours of the Battle of Karansebes. No one knows what caused it. Theories range from a lit pipe to someone sneezed wrong. You're standing 10 feet away from a crater that used to be half a kitchen. In it is a mule, still alive, looking deeply disappointed in everyone. Then someone yells, "They've blown up our rear! The Turks have cannons!" And just like that, it's panic round 4. Troops begin to scatter again, firing wildly into the woods, each other, and in one tragic case, a barrel of pickles. You take a deep breath, you exhale, and then you run, because the last barrel you stood next to exploded, and you're not going 2 for 2 tonight. Now comes your weird trivia nugget. One of the wagons destroyed in the explosion was carrying wax replicas of saints meant to inspire morale among the troops. So yes, flaming saint parts rained from the sky during this battle. A leg of St. Francis allegedly bounced off a lieutenant's helmet and rolled into the stew pot. You leap over a smoking plank and land next to a corporal who's sobbing into a biscuit. What happened, you ask? He points to the crater. They shot the rum. You nod. You don't need details. Nearby, 2 men are fighting over a bugle. Not to blow it, just to beat each other with it, you walk around them, silently saluting their dedication to chaos. Then, like a gift from the gods of idiocy, you find yourself at the edge of a campfire ring where an argument is erupting over who caused the explosion. It was the Hungarians, numbered the Croats. They lit a pipe. It was that Polish guy with the matches. Matches aren't even standard issue yet, you idiot. You raise your hand and offer. Could have been the mule. Everyone pauses. Someone says, "It did look suspicious." And that's joke number 1. An actual Austrian inquiry blamed the explosion on supply mismanagement by the animal division, which is the 18th century way of saying the mule did it. Then someone yells, "They're flanking us again." Flanking who? Doesn't matter. More musket fire. A cannon goes off again, likely fired out of boredom or existential dread. It misses everything and hits a treetop, which falls and crushes a drummer who had just found his shoes. You hide behind a barrel labeled "salted brains," officer rations. You peek out. What do you see? Infantry fighting artillery. Cavalry fighting cavalry. One man yelling at a tent. And here comes joke number 2. Someone tries to surrender to a scarecrow. He lays down his weapon, begs in broken German, and then hugs it. You're not sure whether to laugh or cry. You choose both. Smoke drifts low. Visibility is down to half a field length. You crawl through the mud and find yourself in a clearing where 2 field medics are trying to bandage a cannon. You stare. They stare. No one speaks. Then one says, "Just don't tell the general." Which general unclear? By now, most of them have either fled, cried themselves to sleep, or invented new ranks for themselves. A private next to you insists he's now the supreme captain of nighttime artillery feelings. You nod politely. Let's pause for your conspiracy theory of the night. Did the Ottomans set that mule train on fire? Some reports claim spies infiltrated the Austrian camp and sabotaged supplies. Others say it was a cooking accident. A few blame lightning. One soldier even suggested divine retribution for dessert theft. You personally blame sleep deprivation and a total collapse in leadership. And speaking of leadership, where is everyone? You crawl to the nearest command post. It's abandoned. A pair of boots is still standing upright in the mud, but the officer they belong to has seemingly disintegrated, probably ran, or exploded. Hard to say. Then you hear the rumble. Not cannon fire, not thunder. Wagons, dozens of them. Some genius has ordered the reserve supply wagons to move forward, hoping to stabilize the line. Instead, the drivers panic when they see the carnage and turn around, setting off a chain reaction of wagon crashes. You witness the first one hit a rock, flip and spill its contents hay, boots, dried cherries, and a full-size oil painting of Emperor Joseph II. The painting lands face up. A soldier sees it and salutes, then vomits. Cue joke number 3. That painting was recovered later and given a medal for bravery. It's still in Vienna, hung in a hallway with no caption. Just a date, Karansebes, 1788. You sit down on a broken barrel. The fire has spread to the field hospital. The field hospital has spread into the river. A goat is wearing a sash. You feel at peace. Until someone screams, "They're in the trees!" You look up. There are no trees, just smoke. Someone fires anyway. You lie flat and whisper to no one. It was the Schnapps. A hand pats your shoulder. It's a man covered in soot, holding 2 loaves of bread and a wheel from a wagon. "Everything's under control," he says calmly. Then the wheel falls on his foot, and he screams loud enough to set off another round of musket fire. You curl into a ball and try to remember what side you're on. Then again, maybe sides are a myth, like strategy or sleep. You're not sure how long you've been crawling, but at some point you accepted that mud is your new skin and your uniform is basically decorative moss. There's a flicker of movement ahead, vague, hunched, deliberate. You freeze. Your brain, long since abandoned by logic, slaps together a conclusion. Ottoman scout. You grip your bent musket like it still means something. You creep closer. The figure turns. It's a tree. A very angry-looking tree. Sure, but still. Bark, leaves, branches. Not a Turkish assassin with a dagger between his teeth and a thirst for empire. You sigh in relief, then stab it anyway. Look, the logic's gone. Your brain's running on fumes and potatoes. You plunge your bayonet into the trunk with a war cry that sounds suspiciously like, "Stay out of my soup, you bastard!" The tree does not respond. You fall to your knees and whisper, "I'm sorry, Your Excellency," and give it a little bow. That's where a corporal finds you covered in sap, muttering about Turkish bark spirits. He doesn't even question it, just nods and mutters. Another one. Here's your historical fact before this whole section goes feral. During the Battle of Karansebes, multiple reports surfaced of soldiers attacking trees, rocks, shadows, and allegedly each other's reflections. This wasn't metaphor. It was fog, fear, schnapps, and confusion stirred into a perfect cocktail of delusion. And now for your weird trivia, one cavalry officer filed a formal report of woodland hostilities, which historians still argue was either metaphorical language or him genuinely trying to press charges against a bush. The corporal leads you away from the battle tree, only to walk you directly into a trench where 2 soldiers are having a duel over a spoon. Not fighting with spoons, fighting for a spoon. Apparently, one of them claimed it had divine soup-finding powers, and the other accused him of heresy. There are seconds, there is formality, there is a referee wearing a sock as a judge's wig. You leave! You walk through camp. Someone yells, "Hold fire!" Someone else throws fire. A third person ducks behind a log and whispers, "The trees have allies." You begin to believe them. Cue joke. Number 1. A Polish officer allegedly tried to execute a log for treasonous silence. The court-martial lasted 5 minutes. The log was found guilty and burned. The officer was promoted. Up ahead, you hear more shouting. Bayonets clash. A man screams for Austria and lunges at what turns out to be his own reflection in a puddle. He slips, knocks himself out, and the puddle wins the engagement. You're starting to suspect the puddle is now a colonel. You try to return to your unit, but quickly realize you've been reassigned without paperwork, without orders, and without anyone else being aware of it. You're now part of a makeshift regiment of 6, all wearing different uniforms, and none of them speaking the same language. Your leader is a goat. No one questions the goat. Cue conspiracy time. Some historians speculate that fake orders may have been circulating in the Austrian camp, deliberately issued to confuse, demoralize, or even force retreat. But who wrote them? Ottomans' rogue officers, a prank by a bored quartermaster. We'll never know. All we know is you're currently marching in a circle, and no one knows why. Back to you. You and the goat regiment make it to a ridge. Below you, absolute madness. Men firing in every direction, someone stabbing a hay bale, a wagon spinning in place. And there, just off the edge of the camp, a single figure riding calmly on horseback. You squint. He's wearing Habsburg colors, but his hat is Ottoman, his saddle French, his mustache immense. And the flag he's waving appears to be a bedsheet with a poorly drawn cannon on it. Spy, someone whispers. Messenger, says another. Sane offers a third. You're about to vote for hallucination when the goat snorts, charges down the ridge, and causes the entire group to follow. You charge, too. Why? Because this is Karansebes, and if a goat leads you to death, so be it. At least it's a bold ending. Cue joke number 2. You don't reach the rider. He vanishes, possibly because he was never there, possibly because he was a drunk dragoon trying to deliver laundry orders. No one knows, but the charge continues anyway. You and your new unit crash through tents, over crates, and into what appears to be a field hospital that's been turned into a fencing school. 2 medics are having a rapier duel over whether wounds heal faster if you hum Mozart. You step around them. Someone throws a tent pole at your head. You duck. It hits a cannon. The cannon rolls forward and accidentally fires. The shot sails off into the night and strikes a tree, which collapses on an officer's campfire, knocking over his stew and igniting his pants. He shouts. The forest fights for them and leaps into the river. Cue joke. Number 3, a later regimental report classified this incident as arboreal aggression. The phrase was quoted by at least 3 drunken officers in military songs for the next century. You slump next to a pile of boots. They're not yours. You don't care. A man next to you offers you a sip from his canteen. It's vinegar. You thank him anyway. In the distance, you hear the sounds of marching, not panic, not chaos, actual marching. You sit up. Could it be? No. Yes. Maybe. Your hope withers instantly when someone shouts, "Everybody run the trees, have infantry." There's a moment, just a flicker, where you believe you're safe. You found a bush, not a metaphorical one, a literal, green, leafy bush. It's quiet. It's slightly damp. It doesn't yell at you in Croatian or try to explode. So you curl up behind it, hoping the madness outside fades like a hangover in a monastery. Then the bush stabs you. Yes. You lurch back, howling, because something sharp is jabbed into your thigh. You grab your musket. You whirl around, heart pounding, ready to defend yourself against this traitorous vegetation. And discover it's your roommate, Hans, from your regiment, curled up under the same bush, bayonet forward, sleep screaming something about defending the Schnapps reserves at all costs. He's half asleep, fully armed, and now bleeding from the forehead where you just whacked him with your musket butt. Warum bist du ein Busch, you shriek. Hans blinks at you, confused, then says, "I am the bush." This is fine. Here's your historical fact for this particularly absurd chapter at Karansebes. Many soldiers ended up stabbing or shooting their own comrades during the night, often mistaking them for Ottoman infiltrators. In one documented case, 2 platoons fought for 20 minutes in a trench before realizing they were both Austrian. You both sit up in the foliage, nursing bruises and wondering what's real anymore. Around you, things have not improved. Gunfire echoes from across the ridge. A cannon rolls past, unattended. Someone's waving a mop as a flag of surrender. The moon casts a pale glow over a battlefield so full of self-inflicted wounds, it could be an art installation on military incompetence. Then you hear the marching again. Not the flailing, drunken shuffle you've come to associate with your army's style, but actual, rhythmic, tight marching. You peek out and see a disciplined line of troops advancing through the mist. Could it be? You nudge Hans. I think it's the Ottomans. He shrugs. I think I'm a potato. Fair. You prepare to meet them. You stand, raise your hands, and consider surrendering just to someone, anyone, who might have a working compass and a concept of direction. But before you can do that, bang! Someone shoots. You don't know who. Maybe it's Hans, maybe it's a pigeon, but that one shot is enough. The line of approaching soldiers breaks ranks instantly. It was your own guys. Again, they thought you were the Ottomans. And now they're charging, right at your position. Cue joke number 1. This marks the third separate incident tonight in which an entire Austrian regiment has attacked itself, thinking they were ambushing the enemy. The running total is now Ottoman kills 0 and self-inflicted casualties don't ask. You and Hans sprint back down the slope, dodging bayonets and shouts. One soldier throws a pan, another stabs a tree stump. A third does an elegant fencing lunge directly into a wheelbarrow and knocks himself out. Don't go that way, you yell. It's just more Austrians. They're everywhere, Hans wails. The empire is infinite. You trip over a broken drum and tumble into a cluster of officers holding an emergency strategy meeting. They're standing in a circle, looking at a map that's been drawn on a tortilla with gravy. One points to a blob of meat and says, "This is the enemy front." Another corrects him, "That's a sausage." They stop when they see you. You salute. Wheezing, "Sir, I regret to inform you that we are stabbing each other at statistically improbable rates." An officer raises an eyebrow. "Are you Turkish?" "No, you didn't say it fast enough." He draws a sword. Hans tackles him. The tortilla map goes flying. A cannonball rolls through camp, not fired, just dropped, and flattens a barrel of wine that explodes like a grape-scented regret. You and Hans take cover behind a supply cart, panting. The officer is unconscious. Someone's playing a flute for no reason. Let's drop our weird trivia bomb. Now, one Austrian medical tent was converted into a confession line because so many soldiers thought they were dying and many just wanted to apologize to people they had bayoneted by mistake. One man reportedly confessed to killing the same person 3 different times. Cue joke number 2. You briefly consider confessing to stabbing a bush, but worry it might be court-martialed for espionage. Night is slipping into gray morning light now. You can see the shapes of scattered bodies across the fields, most unconscious, many drunk, all on the same side. A cannon rests in a creek like it gave up halfway through a tantrum. A goat is gnawing on someone's metal. You collapse onto the grass, breath ragged. Then, just to top it off, your commanding officer shows up. He's wearing a nightcap and one boot, demanding to know why no one woke him when the enemy attacked. You sit up, point to the horizon, and say with the calm certainty of a man who has seen the inside of madness, "There was no enemy, sir, only mirrors." He nods solemnly, then trips over a helmet and fires his pistol into the air. Cue your open-ended historical debate. Did any unit at Karansebes actually see an Ottoman soldier that night? To this day, there's no confirmed Ottoman presence during the 2-day disaster. Some historians argue that spies or scouts may have provoked it. Others insist the Austrians were simply primed to panic. A few believe no Ottomans came within miles of the battle that wasn't. Hans pats your shoulder. Next time, he says, we just shoot one barrel of schnapps. You ever seen a retreat that looked like interpretive dance? You're about to... It's dawn now. The sky's a faint soup color. A wind picks up, swirling the remaining fog and burnt flour into the world's saddest snow globe. You're limping along a trench line when you hear it, a low, rising hum. Not shouting, not gunfire. Humming. Someone's singing a marching song in a minor key, and it's sending shivers up your muddy spine. Then you realize it's not a song, it's a stampede. You turn just in time to see the Austrian Imperial Army in full retreat. Not a tactical withdrawal, not a fallback maneuver. Just panicked men, horses, goats, wagons, and a bishop with no pants, all bolting in the same direction because someone yelled cavalry and no one waited to confirm whose cavalry it was. You join them. Of course you do. Your options are A, be trampled, B, be bayoneted by a cook, or C, join the human tidal wave and hope the goats know where they're going. You choose C. You run like your life depends on it, which it does, thanks to your own army's artillery division, which has just been given the brilliant, not at all questionable order to fire at anything that moves beyond the ridge. You are now anything that moves. Cue joke. Number 1, the artillery unit, having slept through most of the battle, decides to wake up with a bang, literally. They open fire on the retreating mass of Austrian troops because they think they're repelling an Ottoman attack. You dive into a ditch as a cannonball whistles overhead and knocks the hat off a general. The general spins twice and collapses. Not wounded, just emotionally done. Another cannon fires. This one hits a cart full of drums. Boom! Brum! Crash! You now have a musical retreat. You are fleeing in rhythm. Someone starts clapping. Now here's your historical fact for this catastrophe's crescendo at Karansebes. The Austrian artillery did open fire on their own retreating troops, reportedly killing or wounding dozens and triggering a full-scale rout. The exact order that triggered this self-destructive brilliance has never been found. You hear someone shouting from a ridge, "Hold your ground!" You recognize the voice. It's a colonel you once saw faint during a thunderstorm. He's waving his saber like a cheerleader. A cannon fires. The blast sends a shockwave through the line and knocks him off his horse. The horse keeps running. The colonel lands face first in a laundry basket. You keep running. Your boot gets stuck in a mud hole. You hop. The mud hole turns out to be a cook pot. You face plant into cabbage stew. Someone behind you trips, falls on top of you, and apologizes in Hungarian. Sajnalam, you smell like soup. You nod. It's the nicest thing anyone said to you all night. Cue your weird trivia moment. A field drummer was reportedly carried half a mile by the retreating troops, still beating his drum while upside down in a barrel. He was later promoted for morale maintenance under inversion. You reach what used to be an officer's encampment. It's now just a crater with a flagpole sticking out of it and 2 pigs fighting over a wig. You duck into a tent. A cannonball lands outside. The tent lifts off the ground slightly. You scream into a boot. A nearby soldier grabs you by the shoulders and shouts, "Which way is Austria?" You point in any direction. He salutes, kisses your forehead, and runs straight into a tree. You're starting to think the tree might win this war. Cue joke number 2. A donkey named Walpurga was given a medal after the battle for leading the fastest retreat unit. Walpurga was later reassigned to logistics and reportedly never trusted humans again. You emerge from the tent and nearly walk into a surrender ceremony. Not to the Ottomans, no, to each other. 2 groups of Austrian soldiers, utterly confused, both convinced they've been captured by the enemy, are in the middle of a tense negotiation over which side has to take responsibility. You interrupt. Guys, we're all Austrian. Silence. Someone blinks. Even him. He points at a man in a kilt, saluting a goat. You nod, especially him. And now, for the conspiracy moment, some reports suggest a false Ottoman flag was spotted on the ridge during the retreat, possibly planted by panicking troops trying to justify the chaos. Others say it was a tablecloth caught in the wind. Either way, it worked. Artillery keeps firing, cannonballs sail into trees, tents, even a riverboat someone tried to convert into a mobile kitchen. The riverboat sinks. The cannon crew cheers. You don't have the heart to tell them it wasn't real. You make your way to the rear camp. The surgeon is operating on a table leg. The chaplain is weeping into a ham. A captain is writing a resignation letter on his chest with a feather quill. You take a breath. It smells like gunpowder, schnapps, failure. And then, just as you think it can't get worse, you hear the unmistakable, soul-curdling blare of a cavalry trumpet. But not Austrian. Not familiar. No, this one sounds Ottoman. You freeze mid-step, mid-breath, mid-breakdown. That sound, that trumpet, it doesn't sound like your cavalry's usual toot of confusion. It's sharper, confident, a bit smug, if we're being honest, definitely Ottoman, possibly even in tune. You turn to Hans, who has, by some miracle, survived the night and is now wearing a saddle like a fashion statement and whisper, "Did you hear that?" Hans squints. "Nope, but I think I can taste it." You both drop to the ground. Someone yells, "They're here!" And a fresh wave of panic stampedes past. One man throws down his rifle and begins to dig a trench with a spoon. Another tries to hide behind a shadow. You grab Hans by the collar. "We're 25 miles from the front." You hiss. "What are they doing here?" Cut to Emperor Joseph II, supreme ruler of the Austrian Habsburg lands, whose army has just spent 2 full days enthusiastically demolishing itself with no assistance whatsoever. The emperor is not here. He's at his headquarters, warm, dry, and still entirely unaware that his best-paid soldiers just invented the world's most embarrassing ghost battle. And that's your historical fact. Emperor Joseph II was not informed of the Battle of Karansebes until after it ended and reportedly refused to believe initial reports, assuming they were jokes. When he finally did visit the site, he didn't laugh, neither did anyone else. Well, except the Ottomans, because they've arrived now, for real. Not in full force, just a vanguard scouting party, riding cautiously through the trees, sabers sheathed, unsure why the entire Habsburg army appears to be face down in mud, praying, crying, or arguing with tents. One Ottoman scout leans to another. "Did we miss the battle?" His friend shrugs. "I think the Austrians missed it too." Here's your weird trivia nugget. The Ottoman troops found crates of abandoned supplies, wagons still hitched, loaded cannons unfired, and most miraculously, a still intact picnic table with cheese and crackers laid out. One Turkish officer allegedly described it as the politest surrender in history. You and Hans watch from a nearby hilltop, peeking through a ripped flag that now serves as camouflage. Below, the Ottoman scouts are literally just walking into camp. No resistance, no traps, just soft ground and discarded sabers. One scout trips over a still sleeping Austrian artilleryman. The man groans, reaches for his musket, and in a final act of loyalty, accidentally shoots himself in the hat. The Ottomans pause, then keep walking. Cue joke number 1. This was the first Ottoman advance in recorded history where no casualties were reported because no one showed up to resist. You could have stopped them with a politely worded letter. You nudge Hans. "Should we alert someone?" "Who the guy screaming at clouds?" Or "the corporal teaching his bayonet to swim?" You nod. Fair. Back at the ridge, officers are holding a crisis meeting in a hole. The meeting minutes go something like, Did anyone actually see the Turks? No. Did we lose the battle? Which battle? The one where we shot ourselves. That wasn't a battle. That was an incident. We've lost 200 men to ourselves. Does it even count? Cue joke number 2. The official report submitted to Vienna labeled Karansebes as a spontaneous maneuver-related disorder. That's a diplomatic way to say we tripped over our own swords and yelled victory. You and Hans sneak down into camp as the Ottomans begin picking through the remains. They're clearly baffled. One soldier finds a cannon still loaded, pointed at a tree stump with a sign that reads, "Definitely a Turk." Another finds a ceremonial Habsburg trumpet inside a pot of cabbage stew. Then one of them spots you. You freeze. He blinks. You wave. He waves back. That's the entire engagement. Let's get into the open-ended debate. Did the Ottomans intentionally delay their attack? Knowing the Austrian army was unstable, some argue they spied on the camp from afar and waited for it to unravel. Others say it was pure luck. A few believe the Ottomans never intended to engage that night at all, and just stumbled upon a perfect opportunity the next morning. Whatever the truth, they walked into Karansebes without a fight and took control of everything. The Austrians, to put it delicately, were too busy fighting gravity, soup, and their own self-worth. One Ottoman officer kneels beside a shattered wagon, picks up a soggy map, and says to no one in particular, "Are they okay?" You are not. You're currently hiding under a tablecloth next to Hans, who has eaten half of a ceremonial boot and claims it tasted better than standard issue. You sigh. Then, as if summoned by the gods of delayed authority, you hear the sound of Emperor Joseph's entourage approaching. Trumpets, hooves, banners. The emperor has arrived. You watch from a distance as he steps out of his carriage, boots clean, cloak flowing, and takes one look at the carnage. Aides-de-camp scatter. Officers sprint to present reports. One captain throws himself on the ground and starts reciting poetry. Another hands the emperor a wine bottle labeled, "We tried." Joseph surveys the field. He sees burnt wagons, broken cannons, piles of boots, a man sleeping in a stew pot, and a goat licking its reflection. He says nothing. Then, very quietly, who was in charge? No one answers. He turns to his guards. Was it the Turks? They shake their heads. He closes his eyes and breathes deeply. Of course not. Cue joke. Num 3. It's rumored that Emperor Joseph II walked back to his carriage, sat down, and said only one word before canceling the next offensive. Unbelievable. You, Hans, and the surviving mess of soldiers sit in a line beside a burnt barrel, watching the Ottomans pick up your supplies like they're browsing a clearance sale. No shots fired, no blood spilled, no glory earned. Just failure, pre-packaged and gift-wrapped in blue and gold uniforms. Hans leans over. So, does this count as a win? You shrug. Only for the trees. You wake up in a ditch. Not a metaphorical one. A real, muddy, cold, horse-trampled ditch, face down in a soggy piece of Habsburg flag and half a pickle. You sit up slowly. The fog's mostly gone now. The battlefield is quiet, eerily so. No cannon blasts, no shouting, no ghost-charging cavalry. Just birds chirping, the soft trickle of the nearby stream, a man quietly weeping into his hat. You're alive somehow. Hans is nearby, chewing on what might be raw cabbage or an old epaulet. He waves at you like a child who just drew a picture of death and wants you to put it on the fridge. You ask, did we win? Hans replies, I think we won't. And that about sums it up. The Battle of Karansebes, if we can call it that, is over. You haven't seen a single Ottoman soldier yet. You've marched, screamed, tripped, shot, stabbed, and retreated from everything except an actual enemy. And now, as you look out over the battlefield in the soft morning light, you see what's left of the glorious Habsburg war machine. One smoldering soup cart, several tents tied in knots, a cannon stuck in a tree, a shoe nailed to a log for reasons that will haunt you forever. Here's your historical fact. When the Ottoman army arrived at Karansebes 2 days later, they found no resistance. The Austrian army had already fled. The Ottomans simply occupied the area without firing a shot. They captured abandoned supplies, wagons, and several confused soldiers who thought they were at a wedding. Cue weird trivia nugget. One of the captured Austrians reportedly asked the Ottomans if they were the catering team. They said yes. He offered them schnapps. You and Hans slowly walk across the field around you. Fellow survivors emerge like startled deer muddy, wide-eyed, unsure what decade it is. A drummer is using his instrument as a chair. A captain is writing poetry in the dirt. One man insists he personally defeated 12 Ottoman ghosts last night and demands a medal. Where are the generals, you ask? Hans points toward the river. You both trudge that way and find a makeshift command tent, half-built, mostly collapsed, with one man inside desperately trying to assemble a new chain of command using dominoes and a puppet. Are we surrendering? Hans asks. No, the man replies. We're pivoting. Cue joke number 1. The phrase strategic pivot entered Habsburg officer slang after Karansebes, where it became code for run away so fast you forget your own name. You sit in the mud, you stare at the horizon, and then, like fate mocking your every decision, a small Ottoman detachment appears calmly riding into camp, sabers sheathed, faces expressionless, probably thinking, "This seems too easy." One of them dismounts, picks up a musket, sniffs it, frowns, then nods to the others. They spread out, securing the already secured battlefield like concerned parents entering a ransacked birthday party. Austrian soldiers just watch. No one fights, no one moves. One man raises his hands and says, "Take me, I've already betrayed myself." Let's move to your open-ended historical debate. Did the Ottomans actually plan to capture Karansebes? Some say it was a tactical goal. Others argue they didn't even know where the Austrians were positioned and were simply scouting when they discovered their enemy had already imploded. Whatever the truth, they got a full camp, loaded wagons, intact artillery, and 0 casualties. It's the military equivalent of showing up late to a robbery and being handed the loot. You and Hans stand as an Ottoman officer approaches. He looks you over, tilts his head, then swear on your muddy soul he offers you a piece of bread. You take it. You eat it. You cry a little. Cue joke number 2. Some Ottoman soldiers assumed the Austrians had set a trap because no sane army would leave that much cheese behind. They spent an hour checking barrels for explosives. They found pickles. Only pickles. Back near the ridge, Emperor Joseph has finally been informed of the true events. He is not taking it well. He orders a series of urgent reforms, better discipline, stricter passwords, less schnapps, more drills. You, meanwhile, are carving a spoon. You have no interest in reforms. You want soup, a bath, and a country that doesn't bayonet its own band. You look at Hans. He's wearing a chicken on his head like a crown. You decide he's in charge now. Cue joke. Number 3, one Austrian battalion began following Hans after the battle, thinking he was a new kind of cavalry officer called a feather marshal. No one corrected them, not even Hans. You finally see a real Ottoman flag raised over what used to be your command tent. You salute it. You don't know why. Maybe because, in this twisted opera of incompetence, the Ottomans were the only ones who followed the script show up. Stay calm, win. You whisper to the wind, take good care of our camp. And from somewhere in the trees, a voice replies, what camp? The morning sun casts a golden light over the battlefield, which now resembles a poorly run carnival that exploded. Somewhere in the distance, a goat is chewing on a military banner. A drummer is attempting to make coffee with musket powder. A man is writing war poetry on a dead fish. You have never felt more at peace. The Austrians are no longer fighting, mostly because there are no bullets left. Also because most of them are too exhausted to scream, and the rest are trying to pretend they were never here. You sit beside Hans, who is now wearing 2 belts, 3 left boots, and a small tree branch taped to his head like a radio antenna. You ask, what now? He shrugs. Court-martial, maybe? Or breakfast? At this point, either would be an upgrade. Which brings us to the after-party. Nobody wanted the military investigation. Let's drop your historical fact with all the grace of a cannonball into soup after the events of Karansebes. The Habsburg command launched an internal investigation. Shockingly, no senior officer was punished. No one court-martialed. Instead, a series of vague reports blamed disorder, weather, and unfortunate positioning. You know, the old trifecta of we have no idea what just happened. But someone has to be blamed. And apparently that someone is the cook. Not a cook, the cook, a man named Wilhelm Short, sweaty, nervous, and very, very loud, who had the misfortune of accidentally lighting a barrel of flour on fire while trying to toast bread during the chaos. That plume of flaming flour was seen by multiple officers and interpreted as either A signal flare from the Ottomans, B, the gates of hell opening, or C, an aggressive pastry-based war crime. So naturally, they blamed him. Cue joke number 1. Wilhelm the cook was briefly charged with culinary sabotage. That's a real phrase. It was later downgraded to reckless seasoning. But Wilhelm wasn't the only suspect. Oh no! Enter the trumpet. Not a person, an actual trumpet. Somewhere in the night, a soldier blew the wrong signal. Instead of the standard rally call, he blew the cavalry charge and 30 drunken riders, already jumpy from schnapps and goat screams, obeyed without hesitation and charged into their own infantry. That trumpet was recovered, examined, and eventually blamed for starting the second largest panic of the night. Cue joke number 2. The trumpet was ceremonially dishonorably discharged in a military ceremony. They played taps. It was very moving. Back to you. You're now part of a reconstruction detail. Your job, collect anything still usable. Uniforms, weapons, horses, soldiers who are only partly unconscious. You find 4 sabers buried in the soup trench. A cannon filled with boots. One man dressed as an Orthodox bishop, claiming divine immunity. A completely intact officer tent that appears to be full of raccoons. You take what you can, you bury what you can't. You and Hans share a crust of bread and try not to look anyone in the eye. Then the orders come in, hold position, rebuild defenses, prepare for Ottoman counterattack. You stare at the messenger. The Ottomans already took Karansebes. He shrugs. That was Tuesday. Today is Thursday. Try again. Cue your weird trivia nugget. Austrian officers reissued orders to fortify the same position they'd lost, unaware that the Ottomans had already moved past it. They built fresh trenches in the opposite direction. You dig anyway, because what else are you going to do? You dig, and you curse, and you wonder how many ways an empire can embarrass itself before the medals stop meaning anything. Nearby, an officer is drawing new battle lines in the dirt with a baguette. Another is attempting to measure artillery range with a violin string. You ask Hans, "Do you think we're going to be remembered?" He nods solemnly. "Oh yes, not well, but definitely." And now for the open-ended debate. Did Karansebes change anything? Did it alter the course of the Austro-Turkish War? Most historians say, no, not really. The war continued. The Habsburg army reorganized. The Ottomans advanced, then retreated. But what did change was how the empire viewed itself, briefly, with horror. Then it forgot. You return to the camp, which now smells of ash, regret, and stewed turnips. The generals are sitting around a table, whispering strategies and sipping wine like none of it happened. Someone mentions revising the battle logs. Someone else suggests, what if we don't call it a battle? What then? Maybe a spontaneous drill, a training exercise, a military ghost story. Everyone nods. Cue joke. Number 3, one version of the report called Karansebes, an exercise in adaptive flexibility, which technically is true if screaming, fleeing, and cannonballing your own leg counts as adaptive. You and Hans lie under a tree and watch the sky. Overhead, the imperial flag flaps lazily on a pole that now leans slightly west, possibly from shame. The cook walks by, holding a pot full of what he claims is soup. No one investigates. You think about writing a letter home. What would it even say? "Dear Mother, we met the enemy. It was us. I stabbed Hans, but he forgave me. We both joined a goat cult briefly. I saw a man duel a mirror. Love, your son, Austria's bravest embarrassment." Then you remember you don't know how to write. And that's when the trumpet sounds again. You and Hans look at each other. You whisper, "No!" He nods. You both roll into the ditch and pretend to be logs. It works. For now. The story of Karansebes should end with redemption. A last stand, a clever reversal, maybe even a rousing speech by a mud-stained general standing atop a cannon, sword raised high, declaring, never again shall Austria shoot itself in the buttocks. But no, it ends with paperwork and brooms. You, Hans, and approximately 3,000 other soldiers are now part of the official cleanup detail. The enemy has moved on. Your commanding officers have collectively agreed to pretend none of this ever happened. And you are sweeping bayonet scabbards off the lawn like some kind of drunken janitor of shame. Over near the river, an artillery crew is fishing cannonballs out of the water with sticks. A medical unit is performing triage on a barrel. Someone is yelling at a cloud. You hear a voice say, "Line up by regiment." No one moves. A second voice, "Line up alphabetically." Still nothing. Third voice, "Everyone who did not shoot themselves, form a line." Absolute silence. You and Hans exchange a glance. "Guess we're not in that line," he says. "Guess not." Cue your final historical fact. The total number of Austrian casualties from the Battle of Karansebes is estimated to be between 500 and 200 men, almost all self-inflicted, no enemy engagement, no battlefield advantage gained, just chaos, bad schnapps, and the worst game of telephone in history. The official military inquiry concludes within a week. Its findings vague, euphemistic, something about unforeseen operational turbulence, which is a nice way to say entire army folded like wet laundry because it couldn't pronounce its own password. Wilhelm the cook is reassigned to soup-only duties. The infamous trumpet is quietly misplaced, and General Colloredo promoted, because that's what you do when someone sleeps through the dumbest disaster in Austrian military history. You reward their commitment to unconsciousness. Cue joke number 1, Colloredo would later write in his memoir, I maintain calm under extraordinary circumstances. Translation, he snored through a 3-day self-fire exercise and woke up to a medal. You and Hans pack up camp. Sort of. He's packed 3 sausages, a broken compass, and one of the ceremonial parade boots left behind in the mud. You've got a musket with no trigger and a pouch of buttons that used to belong to a cannon officer named Rolf. He's fine. Mostly, there's talk of redeployment, rumors of a real battle, a new front, actual Ottomans this time. No one's excited. Someone asks you what happened at Karansebes. You pause. Misunderstanding. You say, they nod. Then add, with fireworks. Maybe. You shrug. Bit of flair never hurts. Cue your weird trivia send-off after Karansebes. The Habsburg army did eventually see real action against the Ottomans, but morale was deeply shaken. So much so that Austrian troops allegedly refused to fight in fog for the rest of the campaign. The fog has become your greatest tactical enemy. Not the Turks, not the French, not famine or disease. Just water in the air. You find a quiet spot near the burned-out mess tent and sit with Hans, who is now wearing his helmet backwards and whistling into a spoon. I think we made history, he says. You nod, just not the good kind. And now, your final open-ended historical debate was Karansebes a real battle or an embellished legend born from whispers and shame? Some historians believe the numbers are exaggerated. Others think it was covered up for decades. Still others argue it had to be true because no one could make up something this perfectly dumb. You lean back, let the breeze roll through the torn remains of what used to be your dignity. A goat strolls by wearing someone's officer sash. You salute it. It ignores you. Cue joke number 2. That goat would later become the unofficial mascot of the regiment and be named General von Bay. Yes, with 5 A's, he outranked you. Rightfully. You and Hans finally start walking, not because anyone told you to, but because staying feels worse than marching. You pass a cannon, half sunk in a ditch. Someone carved oops into its barrel. Up on the hill, a new group of recruits arrives. They're fresh-faced, polished boots, clean uniforms. They look down at you mud-covered, sleepless, carrying a frying pan like it's a medal, and one of them asks, "Is this the front line?" Hans stops. "No," he says solemnly, "this is the rear of front-adjacent collapsed expectations." They nod like that means something. It does now. Cue your final joke. An Austrian officer tried to give a speech to rally morale after the incident, but passed out halfway through saying strategic. The rest of the speech was performed by a violinist and a chicken. Reviews were mixed. You march on. Not toward glory, not toward victory, just toward wherever the next barrel of schnapps hasn't been shot yet. You squint up at the sky and mutter, "Maybe next time we fight someone else." Hans snorts. Like who? Oh, you think for a moment. The ocean. It can't bayonet us back. And off you go. 2 weary soldiers in the world's weirdest empire, leaving behind the ruins of a battle no one understands and no one will ever forget. Hey, you made it. You're safe now. No more cannonballs. No more flaming goats. No more regiments collapsing in on themselves like soufflés made of steel and shame. Just the quiet now, deep breaths, soft ground under your feet. The Battle of Karansebes is over, and whether it was a drunken legend or a catastrophically real military event, one truth remains: sometimes the greatest threat to an empire is its own inability to listen, to trust, or to stop firing at shadows. But not you. You listened. You made it through all 15 chapters of this absurd bedtime war tale. Maybe you're even a little wiser, or maybe just a little more grateful for competent communication and fewer bayonets in your soup. Let it all go. Now the fog, the mud, the sound of someone shouting fire while standing inside a tent. You're not on that field anymore. You're not part of that chaos. You're here, quiet, still, resting. The war is done. The goats are asleep. Even Hans has stopped muttering about the Ottoman trees. Let the silence carry you. Let your breath deepen. Slower now. Slower still. And if you hear a trumpet in the distance, it's not calling you. It never was. Sleep easy.